Hi, friends. So this might be just for Australians, but I'm sure you could probably relate to it if you live in the United States. I don't know what the social welfare for people who are unemployed is. I don't think it's very good at all. But anyway, if you're Australian, I just wanted to talk about the appalling sort of social welfare situation for people who are suffering from institutionalized unemployment, which is a lot of people. I know myself, there was one stage where I couldn't seem to get a job to save my life, and there was like people, it was a difficult time in my life where there were lots and lots of people all going for the same job, and basically it's an employer's market. Basically, they can just pick and choose these days, and I think that was quite a while ago now, but it's much worse. And of course, now because neoliberalism has been for 40 years or so, it's been in existence. It's been intentionally working towards this now, where people don't have any downtime. They are pushed to the limit, and it even happened in nursing. When I was at the times that I was doing nursing, I saw a shift in the way they would get every ounce of, you were already busy as a registered nurse, and then you could see this neoliberalism creeping in, where there was no downtime. They'd make sure that there was no time where there were quiet times. There used to be some quiet times, and then that just sort of disappeared over time. So they squeeze. This neoliberalism is an employer's sort of paradise, and they squeeze every ounce of work that they can get out of you, and for less and less money. And I still can't believe that lots of women are still being paid less than men. I mean, it's unbelievable. I was going to say unfucking believable. Anyway, but I wanted to talk about firstly this article I saw about Newstart. Now, Newstart is a way that the government, I don't think we're as bad as the US in that we do put people who are unemployed on this thing called Newstart, which used to be kind of doable about in the early 80s. You could actually sort of exist on it. You could pay rent. I think rent was a quarter of it. The rent wasn't crazy like it is now. Now it's like just outrageous. I do not know how people on Newstart, which I think is about 250 Australian dollars a week, I have no idea how they can afford to even pay their rent. And they can't really. This is the problem. So they haven't increased the Newstart for unemployed people, this Newstart allowance, for 10 years. It hasn't kept up with the increase, inflation and all of that. It hasn't kept up at all with that. So they're getting $250 a week, and rents can be anything from $150 a room Australian here in Hobart to $200, and forget about renting, having your own sort of a flat or anything, apartment. So people are just having a terrible time. And of course, this is sort of intentional, because then it leads to people being so desperate that they commit crimes, and then they end up in these private prisons, which are being paid, a few $100s a day. If it's anything like the US, I don't know how much they get a day, but people will end up being funneled into these private prisons in Australia, which are becoming more and more numerous. This is what happens when you intentionally make a group through institutionalized unemployment, because it's actually, there could be full employment in Australia, but there could be a federal job guarantee too, and that's another thing I'm going to just briefly mention. If you look up the hashtag #LearnMMT, that's modern monetary theory. That's simply a description of the operational reality of a sovereign economy, which Australia is. The Australian economy, the Australian government could institute a federal job guarantee. But, they're not going to do that, because they're beholden to these corporations. All these politicians in some way or another are beholden to these corporations, and so they make it an employer's paradise by making people so desperate they'll work for nothing, or they'll work 2 or 3 jobs, or they'll have to go on casual work where they don't get really, they never have any job security. I mean, I've heard of people being sacked just before Christmas and then re-employed, so they, don't have to, pay extra for whatever. It's sort of outrageous. And they've gotten rid of penalty rates in Australia, where they used to pay people extra on Saturday and Sunday. So basically the Scott Morrison government and the Labor Party have been really, really making it impossible for people to strike. The unions are becoming less and less empowered. They're making it impossible for people to strike. It's a nightmare, and so it's become a nightmare for people, to live. And I'll just read you some of this. This is for Australians who, don't know much about Newstart and what both major parties are doing. They're not like Albanese. He's the leader of the Labor Party. They refuse to commit to a number for Newstart, an increase, even though it's very clear that even the pension is unlivable right now. It's not really very, can just scrape by, people can just scrape by on it. So it's not even close to the pension, which is about, at this point, I think $4.50 a week or something, Australian dollars. And so the people on Newstart are, getting $250. So if the pension is not enough for people and they're just scraping by, how on earth does any government think that $250 a week, and I think that's what Newstart is, and the $250 a week is anywhere near acceptable. So here's some of this article, and I saw it posted by Ella Haddad, who is a member of the Tasmanian Labor Party, who's a really quite a good candidate and quite progressive. And anyway, she posted this, and it was great to see somebody talking about this. And what I was going to say about Anthony Albanese is he's been going on about the government being difficult about Newstart and sort of basically referring to it as unfunded empathy. And I'm going to get to that in a second, what I think of that hashtag that Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, put about Newstart, unfunded empathy. The Labor Party has refused, before the last election, to commit to even an increase up to the pension, which tells you a lot about the Federal Labor Party. It really does. Just think about that. A Labor Party in Australia refuses to talk about how they would increase it, give a number, and say that they need to do a review. I mean, it's not rocket science to know that if the pension is really not enough for people to actually live in any sort of, it's sort of, people scrape by on that, and that's $4.50 a week. The $2.50 a week is going to be pretty horrendous. I don't think you'd have to be a genius to work that out, and yet they were still tippy-toeing around and being very shy about, and they refused to commit to a number. And they're still refusing to commit to a number. This is the Labor Party, the Federal Labor Party. So Anthony Albanese, not impressed. Anyway, so the text of the article, it said 84% of Newstart recipients skip meals and 66% don't use heating in winter, according to a survey to be released today by the Australian Council of Social Service, as Labor and lobby groups ramp up pressure on the government to increase the welfare payment. The survey of 489 people on Newstart or youth allowance found many can't afford rent, energy, clothing, transport, haircuts, dental care or internet access. 44% said they skipped more than 5 meals a week. 63% said they couldn't afford to eat meat. Well, that's a good thing. I mean, why you don't need to eat meat as vegan. I mean, a plant-based diet is completely fine and nutritional and much better for you. So, I imagine they can't afford to eat a lot of things. And 54% didn't buy fresh produce. Quote, I eat 1 sachet of porridge, 1 tin of food, and 1 popper for vitamin C a day. Sometimes I can't afford the porridge. End quote, one survey participant told ACOS. Nearly 70% of survey participants said they bought only second-hand clothes. That's a good thing, only buying second-hand clothes. Then the problem with buying second-hand clothes is that actually a lot of these shops like Lifeline and St. Vinny's and all of that, who used to have very, very reasonably priced second-hand clothes. I mean, I buy second-hand clothes wherever I can. I think we should all be trying to buy second-hand clothes. Of course, when you want to go to an interview, you may need more than that. And there's hardly anything. They pick the eye teeth, if I can put it like that, there's a lot of these very pricey secondhand clothing stores that go around to the sort of St. Vinny's and those kinds of places and take all the good stuff. And so there's actually hardly anything left that's sort of worthwhile that I've noticed, and it actually is more expensive. And some of the things are quite expensive. So really, secondhand shops are actually nowhere near what they used to be. That's what I found. But anyway, and more than half had less than $100 left in their pockets each week after housing costs. I'd say that's probably an exaggeration. I'd say they probably don't have anything left in their pockets, because even, say, 25 years ago, people were, living from paycheck to paycheck. And, so I'm not sure if that's true. But anyway, quote, "I only shower once a week to save on water and electricity costs," end quote. Another participant said, quote, "I only flush the toilet when necessary. I am no longer purchasing food that requires refrigeration so that I can turn the fridge off," end quote. ACOS chief Cassandra Goldie said the survey results were a moral wake-up call for the Morrison government. Well, that's funny, because the Morrison government doesn't have any morals centre. They do when it comes to welfare for the rich and welfare for corporations, social welfare for the rich and social welfare for corporations. That's what the Morrison government is into. And in some ways, the Australian Labor Party, even though they talk big talk and stuff, they actually don't come across, I think, with what they need to. So, quote, "Australia is the wealthiest country in the world, yet we have people skipping meals, staying in abusive relationships and showering once a week because they are on the grossly inadequate Newstart payment," Dr. Goldie said. Quote, "An urgent increase of $75 a week is the absolute minimum we need after 25 years without a real increase," end quote. Well, I didn't realize it was 25 years. 25 years. And $75 a week, that's really not enough. It is the absolute minimum, but it's really nowhere near enough. Labor spokesperson Linda Burney agreed, saying the government was running out of excuses not to boost the payment. They don't really need it. Look, honestly, these governments today, they don't even sort of need excuse. They don't even try to sound like they have any feasible excuses for anything. They really don't. They don't care, and they don't care what the public think anymore. We have a politics of disposability. We've all become disposable, and that's why that's why they're not doing things like this, because people have become disposable now. Quote, "Newstart is too low. It's so low that people are being pushed into poverty, and it's preventing them from getting work," end quote, Miss Burney said yesterday. And this is the other thing. The fact that we're living now in a society where it doesn't matter if work is actually sort of satisfying you in any sort of, emotional, spiritual sense, or a sort of a intellectually or anything. It doesn't matter if it's sort of giving you fulfillment. That's not even it hasn't been on the agenda for a long time. It's like, it doesn't matter what work you're doing as long as you're working. Even if it's soul destroying, even if it's, in an abattoir where you're constantly murdering, sentient animals every second, sort of thing. It's sort of, that's where we've been at for a while, and that's why neoliberalism must end, and capitalism too. There's no sort of good outcome in end stage capitalism or capitalism along the way. There is no good outcome for that. So we really need to totally reevaluate the way we are functioning in society, this capitalist system, the neoliberalism, and the politicians that bow down before corporations and before the US empire. We really need to look at that. So Scott Morrison has continued to rule out raising the Newstart allowance despite several prominent coalition politicians, including former Prime Minister John Howard. This shows how bad it is. John Howard, who was just awful, and former Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce, publicly contradicting the party's official position, calling for the payment to be increased. And I guess the only reason former Prime Minister John Howard is saying that, because he thinks that, that people will eventually push back on that, and it'll affect their voting. It'll affect them winning in the next election. It's got nothing to do with empathy for people who are in a bad situation. It's got nothing to do with that. It's actually about them, really. You have to throw a few crumbs to the plebs to keep them happy, to keep them sort of somewhat happy. Otherwise, you might have some pitchforks and guillotines being lined up, and I think that's kind of, we're heading towards that thing. I'm not for violence, but I mean, eventually, if you crush people enough, that's what happens. You end up with bloody revolutions. I'd say that it'll be because of the militarized police and everything else throughout the world, and they can see this coming, and the governments can see this coming, and they're preparing for it, but they also know that they need to throw a few crumbs to us plebs so that we don't get out the pitchforks. So anyway, the Nationals have also indicated they are undertaking modelling into jobs and economic benefits to boost to Newstart would give regional areas. Well, when people have a little bit, they need to increase it more than the pension, but they won't. But even if you have a little bit of disposable income, the whole economy benefits. And I'm going to talk, as I said, I'm going to talk about just briefly about, I may as well talk about it now. The thing is, and this is where we need to learn MMT, that hashtag learn MMT. And there's a lot of, like Stephanie Kelton, Dr. Stephanie Kelton, who is Senator Bernie Sanders from the US, his economic advisor for 2016 and 2020, she came out to getup.org, and she gave a talk about our sovereign economy. The US has a sovereign economy. There's a whole lot of countries in the world that have a sovereign economy. They're their own currency issuer. And so they cannot, like a debt, a national debt is not what we think it is. It's not like a personal debt. Like they like to say that the national debt is like a personal debt that we need to pull in our belts and all this sort of thing. But a government debt is not the same as a personal debt. And so the government actually could afford to increase Newstart easily. It could afford to fix infrastructure. It could afford to have a federal job guarantee. And when I say federal job guarantee, I don't mean slave labor, and I don't mean just taking any old crap job. I would really implore you to look into a federal job guarantee and what that means. And if you look up Dr. Stephanie Kelton, she talks about that regularly. If you look up Real Progressives on Facebook or on YouTube, they talk about it every single day. And as I said, MMT is simply a description of the operational reality of a sovereign economy. And so, because I know, when I hear things like Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, talking about unfunded, he put a hashtag, unfunded empathy on Twitter. He's indicating that the government cannot afford to increase Newstart. And that is an economic lie. That is economically illiterate. That is an economically illiterate statement. And I hope that he knows more about the economy than that hashtag, because the government can afford that. You never hear them saying, can we afford that submarine? Can we afford that, dozens of F-35s that are useless and have all sorts of problems? You'll never hear them asking that, because yes, a sovereign economy can afford that. The only constraints are resources. And that's why we need to understand MMT, because that will explain why a lot of what is said to us by politicians and even some economists is actually economically illiterate, and it's actually a dangerous neoliberal lie. They're dangerous neoliberal lies we're being fed, and it's actually keeping us, like, for example, the idea that federal taxes fund spending. Federal taxes do not fund spending. And so, we don't need to be raising federal taxes to be able to afford to increase Newstart. We don't need to raise federal taxes to return our healthcare system to a completely free one. We need to raise taxes on the rich, but not for the reasons we think that we do. We need to do it for ethical reasons, etc. We don't need to raise taxes on the rich so we can afford the things that the public deserves, because the government is supposed to be here for the public. They're not supposed to be here to be giving handouts to banks and give handouts to corporations and all of that. They're supposed to honour the social contract, which governments haven't been doing for a very long time. And if we want to end up like the United States, which is an absolute mess, even though it's a sovereign economy and they could have free healthcare right now and all of that, if we want to go in that direction, let's just keep going and not pushing back on this neoliberal lie. I even heard somebody in a political meeting saying that, oh, people don't want free healthcare. And basically that is just such nonsense. And see, this is the sort of the propaganda that they're putting out now, trying to get us to believe this that neoliberalism is totally fine and that people don't want free healthcare and they don't want, it's sort of like they're trying to get people to forget about what Australia used to be like when it had free healthcare under Gough Whitlam, Medicare, and it was for everybody, and there was no health insurance companies. There was free healthcare, there was free education. People could go to universities, for free. And that is not some pie in the sky thing. We can have that right now because we have a sovereign economy. Like I said, the only constraints are resources. And I implore you to look into this Learn MMT. And Stephanie Kelton gave a great talk at getup.org about this issue, the dangerous economic myths. That's the name. That's part of the title of the talk she was giving. So please look that up. I'll post a link in the information section of this video on faint signals for Vega. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly read through the last bit of this. There's not much more of it. Communications Minister Paul Fletcher yesterday refused to deny reports he intervened to remove from a parliamentary report a bipartisan recommendation to increase Newstart when quizzed about the tenure as Social Services Minister. Quote, "We are completely consistent in our position in relation to Newstart," end quote, Mr. Fletcher told the ABC. Quote, "Our focus when it comes to Newstart as a government is on getting people off Newstart and into the workplace as quickly as possible." Quote, "We've created 1.3 million jobs since we came into government. We're having considerable success in getting people off welfare rolls into work. Of course, there's more to do, but Newstart is designed to assist people to make the transition into the workforce," end quote. See, that's just claptrap from a neoliberal or neoconservative. Anyway, it's going to because there's a lot I could say about that, but it's just about to rain. Anyway, we should not allow this mean-spiritedness and this anti-people these anti-people policies to continue. If we allow that, we do it at our own peril. And the way to do it is grassroots movements pushing against it. That's probably the best way, because politicians seem incapable of being able to really, really push back on anything. They think that they have to appeal to the hardest and meanest, sort of common denominator, and they're worried about what corporations are going to think of them. And so they keep on and keep crushing these people. And honestly, I shudder every time I think about trying to live on that amount of money every week that these unemployed people. Isn't it bad enough that there are people who want to work and now they can't find work because there's just too many people looking for work, and they also get more and more demoralized, more and more depressed, and it becomes harder and harder to actually go looking for work, and they get more and more depressed because they can barely afford to live. And there are homeless people now in Tasmania, homeless people in Australia, and that is an outrage. We should all be outraged about it. We should never, ever accept homelessness, ever. Ever, 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 ever. In any country in the world, we should never, ever accept homelessness. So this is something is crucial that we push back on this. That any politician that is okay with homelessness and is not doing anything about it, or is okay with the way Newstart is, that it's appalling and it's absolutely unlivable. Any politician who is not doing something and committing to at least raising that to the pension level, at least, is not somebody that you should be voting for, that you should be supporting, ever. So let's remember that. Anyway, it's getting dark, so I better get inside, and it's freezing. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please get on to Anthony Albanese on Twitter. There's no point in talking to that ridiculous Scott Morrison, that right-wing awful man that's a racist, homophobe, transphobe, misogynist person. To just bypass that Prime Minister and just start saying things on Anthony Albanese's Twitter thread, start saying things, reminding him about, post that Stephanie Kelton thing from getup.org about the sovereign economy and that we can afford all the things that we're supposed to be having, including free healthcare. Just let him know that we know that these economically illiterate lies they tell us every day that we need to pull with it. Oh, this fear mongering about the debt, the national debt, when we're a sovereign economy, that sort of thing. Look at Professor Bill Mitchell from the Center for Equity and I think it's Full Employment or something, Coffee. Check his blog out. He's an Australian professor. He's really fantastic. He talks about MMT, the operational reality of a sovereign economy, and he talks all about the federal job guarantee, the dangers of a universal basic income, which is a neoliberal scam. Remember that. The universal basic income is a neoliberal scam, and that's why so many oligarchs are for it. That's why so many, you'll see people talking on mainstream media, because they're okay with that. Because once you're on it, they can say, well, you can afford your own health care. You can afford this and that. You know, you're getting $250 a week or whatever. You know, they'll just leave you swinging in the wind. So it's a neoliberal scam, so never fall for that. So get on to Albanese, get on to all those Labor Party people, get on to the Greens, because I'm not sure what the hell they're doing, the Australian Greens. So get on to these people and learn MMT so you know what I'm talking about. I can't really explain much more. I'm no expert at it, but I know what I know, and I know that we can afford to raise Newstart easily. We can afford a whole lot of things right now. The only constraints are resources, and they're telling you a lie when they say the government's budget is like a household budget. It is not. Okay, so thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you like the content. Please click the notifications bell, otherwise you don't receive notifications when I drop a video. And please leave comments. I always welcome comments. And let's start to change this narrative, this neoliberal narrative that is destroying us, destroying communities, destroying people's lives, and where the austerity that is absolutely killing people, literally. It's definitely killing people in the United States, and it's killing people here too. And people are suiciding because it's untenable. Life is untenable. And that is an absolute tragedy, and it should not be happening, and there's no reason for it to be happening. So let's do something about that, shall we? Okay, let's form non-violent grassroots movements and do something about it. Okay, thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.